Hey, you are on the block party with me and award-winning creative director and designer Ernie Cefalu. This is our segment, Ernie's Corner. I'm your host, Joyce Conroy, and we are going to talk about Michael Bruce Ernie. It was an album that you had a hand in. It's called In My Own Way, and I am just amazed that so many of the original members from the Alice Cooper band that they did a lot of solo work.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. And thanks, Joyce. It's great being here again on the block. I can take my shoes off and kick back and relax now that we got rid of the gremlins.
I know we need an
Oh,
exorcist, Ernie.
oh man. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. But, yeah, Michael, Michael Bruce was a really unique character, just like GB and Alice and, Neil and Glenn and Dennis. They were kind of each one of them was a very talented guy that brought an individual piece to the whole, which made Alice Cooper Group or the Alice Cooper Band one of the hottest bands around. I mean, I remember at one point when we were doing a lot of work, we had just done finishing up Billion Dollar Babies. And we were in the crossroads of the world, and there was a newsstand near us. We were between Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard, and there was this street that ran parallel connecting them. And there was a newsstand there, a big newsstand. And I remember going by there and counting 9 magazine covers that the Alice Cooper Group and Alice Cooper were on. I mean, they were one of the top acts around. They brought theater to rock and roll. And of course, we know how that whole group came together with signing to Bizarre Records and Frank Zappa and Shep Gordon coming in and, just creating a whole new genre of music and theater. And Michael was really very instrumental in writing. Not only was he a great guitar player, as Dennis was a great bass player, and GB was a guitar player, and Neil was a great drummer, and Alice was a great front man. I mean, you talk about frontmen and they say that, Mick Jagger is the greatest frontman of all time. Well, that's true. And I would put right up there with him, I would put Alice Cooper because there was nobody like him. And he was so unique and he really believed, they all believed in not only individually their own talents, but making up the whole. And I came along, with School's Out, which was right after Killer, which was their big breakthrough album. And School's Out became a huge sensation, and it was great being involved with them in that and meeting them and working with them. And I remember Michael and I hit it off pretty well. Glenn Buxton was the one that Bonnie and I were closest to. Every time they were in town, he would come by. Michael would come by sometimes, and I'd see them a lot in the stuff that we were doing. They would come by the studio. We would go to the recording studios where they were laying down tracks whenever they were in town. So we were pretty much part of. And then Alive was based in Hollywood in L.A. on Melrose there, and so we were always hanging out in the Alive offices, which is base headquarters and with Shep and stuff. And so it was really nice being part of all of that. And we had talked about this before. I drew a lot of comparisons between Pacific Pioneer when we started in 1972, a lot like a rock band. Each one of us was an individual talent that kind of came together. And there were a couple of people that came in and out really quickly because it wasn't the right mix. It had to be the right mix. And for one reason or another, it wasn't. But then the right one came along, and when we had the right mixture of talent, and we're doing our art in a garage, if you will, a small office, and then all of a sudden we start playing high school proms, and we start playing different get-togethers and stuff, and battles of the band, and we were in that same kind of position with Pacific Pioneer and the art that we did. Their art was music, our art was art, and coming together like that and drawing those kind of comparisons. And then as we're really starting to happen, we got hit singles. We're out on the road. People are showing up. We're drawing crowds the same way the Alice Cooper group did. Uh, it all came apart. And, when the group broke up uh, in 1975, Michael decided, that he was going to go off on his own. I think he was the first one that really did something outside of the group. And, in fact, he did it. The name of the album, In My Own Way, was really the great title and the perfect title for this because Michael wanted to make sure that it was just him. This is what he did. And Alice was really the only one that was involved in this album. And I think he sang on one or two tracks with Michael. But Michael did it completely out of any kind of Alice Cooper group kind of comparison, including the production. He didn't use
Bob
Bob
Ezrin,
Ezrin. Bob
yeah.
Ezrin. He didn't use Bob Ezrin as the producer on this, and I think that kind of, I know why he did it, and I know why he used Francisco Scavullo to do these photographs of him. I mean, they're beautiful photographs, and Scavullo was right up there with Richard Avedon as far as fashion photographer, and he really did a great job with this, and came to us. Shep and he came over to the office and asked us if we would get involved with this album and gave us this photography to work with. And I mean, I did some lettering for him and I was able to hear some of the tracks and it was really good music. It was really, but the problem was that he was missing the front part of it. Michael wasn't a front man. He really wasn't. I mean, was a great songwriter, great guitar player, had a lot of great ideas when it came to the Alice Cooper group and the beginnings of it all. And in fact, I think, some of the best songs, the biggest hits were when that group was together and Michael and Alice were writing together. And when you sort of take that apart, it was a lot like Bill Garland and Drew Struzan and Joe Garnett and people like that at Pacific Pioneer. When they started leaving, it became harder and harder to keep the level of the success that we had formed at that point. Because and it's so funny, Joyce, because we started in 1972, 70, the end of 71, 72, 73, and 74 into the beginning of 75 were the strongest years that we had. And the same thing was true with the Alice Cooper group. The end of 1974, they were all going in different directions. Alice was going off on a solo career with Welcome to My Nightmare, which was, what we had gotten involved with. But right before that was Greatest Hits and Billion Dollar Babies. And I think Dennis went off, and I think was Dennis. Maybe it was Dennis, and I think it was Neil, and I think by that time Glenn was no longer with them. I don't think, but they started the Billion Dollar Babies. They became the Billion Dollar Babies. Michael went off on his own and did this solo album, and Alice was with Welcome to My Nightmare. That was his big, coming out album as a solo artist, and this album was really important to Michael. We had many conversations about what he was trying to achieve on this album, and it was really hard because he wasn't, like I said, he wasn't a front guy, and I think he kind of knew it. He didn't really have the voice to do it. He didn't really have the personality to do it, and that, being a front guy is a really hard thing because it's really like all on you. And for me, and we've talked about this before, for me, it's always been about the voice. Whatever group I was attracted to was mainly because of the lead singer, the music, and maybe it's because I'm not a musician, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but it was always about the voice, and it's so funny because earlier today I was listening to the radio and Blood, Sweat, and Tears came on with David Clayton Thomas. And he was one of my most favorite singers of all time. But when he left that group, he never really was able to put it together as a solo artist. And he was the singer. but finding the musicians to make it like blood, sweat, and tears just didn't happen. And I think that happened to each and every one of these guys, including Alice. I mean, Alice is great because he was the front guy and he brought the theater to it. So the musicians were really kind of secondary to him, and to Shep too. I mean, they was really all about Alice. Shep knew that Alice would be the standout person that had a long future beyond even music. And the other guys were just musicians. And, in a way, he was right because each one of them never really had the success that Alice has had in his career because, he was the whole show. I mean, he was the one that was getting hung. He was the one that was getting his head cut off. He was the one with the snakes and the makeup. The rest of them were, like Kiss. Every one of them, became a personality and had the makeup. In the Alice Cooper group, it was only Alice. So in a way, it kind of benefited Alice more than it did the rest of the guys because for them to find another Alice Cooper to be their front guy was an impossible task. They weren't able to do it. And they've done some great music. Blue Coop we talked to Dennis, great. Neil has done the whole country thing and had many albums and good albums, good music. Michael too. This album it was really underappreciated. And I think a lot of it was because that Michael wasn't a front guy. He really didn't have a voice that had the kind of power that Alice had, and he didn't have even though he was really good looking, there were a lot of really good looking rock and rollers, I mean, the Bon Jovi, I mean, people like that were beautiful. David Lee Roth, they had even, Jim Dandy, they had that kind of charisma, that kind of, and it was a lot of it was attitude and personality, the feeling of comfortable being that front guy. And I don't think Michael ever really had that. He had it when he was playing guitar, because in that group, I mean, he was the lead guitar player and he was the co-songwriter with Alice, and there was that kind of camaraderie that Alice never found afterwards. And then you got to have somebody like Bob Ezrin that knew how to put it together. And I think, in a way, I know why, like I said, I know why Michael did what he did because he wanted it to be his way. And there was that tension in the group when they were breaking up. And I remember that. And they never disliked each other. Okay. It wasn't like, I hate you and we're never going to, it wasn't any of that. It was kind of like the way the Beatles broke up. I mean, they all went off in their own directions, and none of them really were as successful as they were, even though they had great careers, as they were when they were the Beatles. And I think that really, that plays a lot in music. Finding that right combination for me, like finding the right combination of artists. And there were other great artists that came along after, the core group of Pacific Pioneer left by 1975. They were all off and I was on my own with a new team. It's like having a Super Bowl team that's won all these rings and then you don't have it. A lot of them retire and you're trying to build a new team. And I kind of got blindsided by that in a way because I was so content and positive about what we were doing as a group of artists that, as Joe Garnett put, we were the Mecca. We were the magnet that attracted all these other young artists to come to Pacific Pioneer. And it was really like that. And I never really spent enough time developing, okay, because I was very comfortable, just like Michael and all the rest of them were in the group. We were very comfortable. You feel good. You have that positive. We've got hits. People are coming to our concerts. We're getting exposure and you could become you become almost complacent, not in the fact that you want to better what you did the time before, but you just felt comfortable. It's like being a family. And I know that you've experienced those kind of experiences in your career as well, right? I mean, you've had
Yes.
that combination and when it's all perfect.
That's
Yeah.
what led me to doing freeform radio,
Yeah.
because yeah, and starting over, that's a very scary thing. And I think with a lot of these artists and musicians, in a way, fame is a double-edged sword, because
Yeah.
when you're hungry, to get there. A lot of times when you arrive at that journey, it's great, but then, oh my, what is the next step?
Yeah.
Ernie, when I looked at this LP, I pulled it up, and the photography is beautiful. I love the lettering. The producers were Dino Danelli and Gene
Yeah.
Cornish of the
The
Rascals,
Rascals.
and they're
Yeah.
top
Yeah.
notch guys. The
Yeah.
late
Yeah.
Dino Danelli, and just a phenomenal drummer. And I
Sure.
was surprised that they were a part of this project. That was
Yeah.
really something.
Yeah. Well, again, Francisco Scavullo did this photography. He was right up there with Richard Avedon, one of the top fashion photographers in the business, in the world.
Yeah. Donna
And
Summer, I think he photographed Donna
yeah,
Summer a
oh,
lot.
a lot of people, a lot of people. And so Michael didn't spare, and Shep, also let it happen. There were times we'll talk about in the future, like Kane Roberts. I mean, even though he was part of the Alice Cooper group, there was no budget. With Michael, Shep put the budget to it. I mean,
Hmm.
he used Scubulu, he used us, he used the producers, he used the musicians. There were great musicians in this album, but it just he didn't have the ear that Bob Ezrin had. And Michael's music and Michael himself working with Bob Ezrin, I mean, he couldn't, I mean, I'm sure he would have loved to. Even though these other guys were great and the Rascals were a great band and they were very, both Gene and Dino were really a very important part of all that, they didn't have the understanding to make Michael be as great as he could have been. I mean, and again, part of that greatness is becoming, well, okay, Michael, it's your album and stuff, but we need a singer. We need a front guy, and you're not it. You're a great guitar player, great songwriter, great collaborator, but it just isn't for you to be the front guy, it isn't there. And I think that the critics just really ripped into this, because of that, because they were expecting an Alice Cooper group member that would blow their
Yeah.
mind, and it just didn't have it. And I, you know, I feel for him because I experienced the same thing. Once Drew was gone, once Bill Garland was gone, once Carl Ramsey. Those were the three. Those were the four of us were like the four horsemen, man. I mean, we could do anything. And then we had production artists, we had secondary illustrators that were good, but not those three and myself. And to lose them, like you said, it's very scary. It was scary. I mean, I never really let it control me. I never went down in flames because of it, because I was still comfortable in who I was and what I could do. And I had done it. The biggest things that I ever did in my career were done before Pacific Pioneer, the Rolling Stones song, Jesus Christ Superstar, Cheech and Chong's Big Bamboo, Alice Cooper's Schools Out. Those were documentary kind of iconic images that I created. So I knew that I could bring value, but how do I find the other guys? Because it can't be just me. There are a lot of great artists and stuff that are out there that are much better than I was. I was lucky enough to launch my career before Pacific Pioneer, and then it's like having a hit album, and now you got to come up with another hit album, and you can really lose yourself in trying to create that greatness again, or you can just with having the security that I have in me and with my partner Tony, who was the vice president at Craig Braun, head of sales, good looking guy, could sell Eskimo ice cubes. The guy was amazing. And the combination that we had was like it was like Bachman Cummings, it was like McCartney Lennon, it was like Shufflu Garboy or Garboy Shufflu. We had that winning combination that we could build on. It was like having a foundation that was solid because of what he had done, because of what I had done. We come together and made something even greater than either one of us. And I think that's where this kind of album and Michael kind of fell short because he couldn't find that Alice Cooper in his life that he could co-write with, that he could exchange ideas with, because Michael was always pushing the envelope. Michael was always coming to the table with stuff that was different, that was, and that's the thing one of the things that I had with Drew and Bill and those guys beyond their talent was their willingness to push the envelope, to come back. If I came with an idea that was kind of like something else, they'd bust me right away. No, no, we need to be greater than that. So we were pushing each other. And that's the magic that the Alice Cooper group had. They were pushing each other. Then when Michael went off on his own, when Dennis went off on his own, and Neil and I don't, Glenn never did because he was gone too soon. But even so, he didn't really do it. The other guys did. And to find that other piece, in their case, it was more than just one piece. In my case, it was more than one piece. Very, very similar. What we were doing was very similar to what Alice Cooper Group was going through. And it's so funny because when we talked about doing this album, I hadn't really given it a lot of thought. That connection of how we all sort of depended on each other. And then when we were gone from each other, I mean, Drew, let's face it, Drew went on to become more famous than any of us put together, most collected illustrator in the world. That's something. Bill Garland did as well. I mean, I could honestly say that I maintained and I grew, but at a different rate, at a different place, because my name was never on anything. We talked about that before.
Mhm.
You're not going to find my name on any album. Later on, there was a couple, but that at that time, it was with me. It didn't matter because it was about the company, and I was more about the company than it was individually. Even though everybody that worked there that did something got credit, my credit was always Pacific Ioneer because I owned half the company, and why confuse things? Now, in hindsight, I wished I would have put my name on there because there are people that are taking credit for stuff that they had nothing to do with. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. Life is too short to worry about that kind of stuff. And Michael, I was hoping that Michael would join us. I never got a response back, but if we do, I'll make sure that we revisit this and this cover and this album. And along with the front and back cover, we were able to do the sleeve as well. I'll send you these images.
Oh,
There's
that's nice. They're very
yeah,
nice.
yeah, a lot of photography, a lot of really good photography. That Gary Sloan was our photographer that did a lot of these shots and put this together with the lyrics from the album. But again, I wish that it could have been a better accepted album. But a lot of times, they they get rediscovered. And maybe, just maybe this album will get rediscovered.
I sure hope so. And Mike, I mean, he's Michael's actually in the Arizona Music and Entertainment Hall of Fame
Oh,
because
really?
he was the band member that was from Arizona. So that is wonderful. And I believe when Alice is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that Michael was part of that
Yeah,
induction.
deservingly so that he was inducted into that, and deservingly so that the group was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That took a long time because Jan Winter didn't like them.
That's my understanding. If
Yeah,
Jan didn't like you, and
yeah. And
that was a
well,
big
yeah,
criteria there,
yeah,
huh?
yeah. He ran the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame the same way that those guys ran Studio 54. If they liked you, you could get in. If they didn't, you couldn't get in to save your soul. And Jan Winter had a real hair up his butt about Alice Cooper Group. So they were kept out for quite a while. And now that he's gone, we'll see what happens with it all. I think that I was summoned there a couple of times to Cleveland to talk about my collection and stuff because they don't have any original album cover art. There are 90 music museums in the United States, and not one of them has a piece of original album cover art. I have a lot of it, and they don't have any. So they wanted me to donate it, and I just wasn't in the donating mood. And now bigger things are going to be happening, as you and I discussed, and the block party is going to be the first place that's going to be talking about this stuff and hearing about it as we move forward this year. It's going to be a very exciting year, and plenty of these album covers to still talk about. But this one was very special, and unfortunately, it really fell short of the critics. But that's okay. I remember when we did Berlin with Lou Reed, and man, they panned it, they hated it. Now it's iconic, it's a classic. It's all, and I think that this album will come around because the music is good. It's really good, and I don't know whether you've had a chance to listen to the
Yes, I
album.
actually have, and it was a King of America, just a great song.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like the way it was done. I think it was a good album. It was a
yeah,
good, I'm
yeah.
certainly not what was on par with what the Alice Cooper band was
Right.
doing,
And
but
I think that's what they expected.
that's something you're very right there, Ernie. I
Yeah,
agree with
and
that assessment.
that'll hurt you, it really will. And in a lot of ways, we could have really suffered that same loss in the album cover art business and the album cover business because all the illustrators were gone. And I didn't really have, I hired a couple of other illustrators that came on, but were never up to what we had. I mean, it's a real tough thing to accept. But in a way, in Pacific Ioneer's life, it was okay because we were already in corporate America. We were already doing work in corporate America. So for us, by 1984, when the record business had really declined for us, I mean, we were doing between 4 and 6 albums a month, every year. But in between those, at the same time, we may be working on 4 or 6 album covers, but we're also working on 3 or 4 corporate pieces. So when the album cover world declined for us, the corporate world opened up for us, and it was really an easier transition for me because I didn't have to be the Pacific Ioneer that we were in the record business, just like they didn't have to be the Alice Cooper group that they were. I mean, it's kind of nuts, but I can't help but draw those kind of parallels because it was the same. We were both were creating art. One was audio, the other one was visual. And when the illustrators were gone and the corporate world really took off, and we were still doing album covers, but it went down to maybe 2 a year or 2 a month, and then maybe 3 or 4 a year to now maybe I do 1 a year. But my major work is, from the corporate world. And it was easier for me because I didn't have to be the Ernie Cefalu that was the creative director in the music business. Michael and Dennis and Neil, all of them still needed to be the Alice Cooper group. I didn't have to be the Pacific Ioneer to the corporate world. And so it became easier for me to make that transition. And again, like I said, I never really thought about it much until we talked about doing this album. And I was really, it was tough for these guys. It really was. And I'm sure it was tough for Alice too, because you know why? Because he never had a hit as big as he had when he was with these guys because he still needed to be Alice Cooper and the group, and they needed to be the Alice Cooper group. I didn't need to be Pacific Ioneer from the record business. I was Pacific Ioneer in corporate world, which was a whole different Pacific Ioneer. It was photographers but the ideas and the lettering and the concepts were always there still, but if it was a different consumer that I was selling to, even though a lot of the corporate people, a lot of them were music fans. And so that made it kind of like, wow, you're the guy that did all those album covers, not like, well, where's my greatest hits album or where's my Black Sabbath album on my product? They were more conservative. They wanted to see pictures of their product, not illustrations. They wanted me to understand marketing and how you present stuff to consumers on a mass scale in with products. It's not a music product. It's a food product. It's a sports product. It's a this or that. It's technology. It's speakers or record players and stuff. So it was a different world, even though they were similar, they were different, and I didn't need to have to be the Ernie Cefalu of Pacific Ioneer album cover. I was Ernie Cefalu of Pacific Ioneer corporate, and that was a real thing for me that made it easier because I don't think I certainly wouldn't have been the Ernie Shuffler Pacific Ioneer without the illustrators because the group I was never as strong in the music business as I was when we were all together. Just like these guys, they can say the same thing. Alice is still going. They're all still going. Alice have had albums, but his albums don't sell like they did when they were the original group. They just don't have the hits. He has the show. So I have
Yes.
the concept and the lettering. He had the show. He's the guy with the snakes and gets hung and all that stuff. And he's still like that, with the monsters and it's theater. These guys weren't really theater. They were part of it. Alice was the front guy. And, in my case, it was Drew Struzan was the front guy. Bill Garland was the front guy. I was always the backseat guy. You see their name on everything. You don't see mine. We talked about that. And that was because I was the company. And I was lucky enough and blessed enough to be able to keep that going and make that transition. I see that we're almost running out of time. So there is a mind meld here. And I know what you're gonna pick.
Yes.
You've already said
I
it.
gave it away.
Yeah, you did. You sort of blew it. But for me, so far so good is a great cut. And if the sky should fall, those two cuts for me, along with your pick too. But I mean, those two, so far so good, was really it stood out. And so if the sky should fall, that really stood out as well for me. So that would be my pick. And thank you so much again for letting this all happen, Joyce. I love you. And sorry about the little fiasco today, but we got through it.
We always do, Ernie.
We
We
do.
always do.
God
Just thank
bless you.
you so much. And Michael, we're going to give you some exposure on the block
Yeah,
party. You
yeah.
deserve it.